Welcome to Safe on Deck. Episode 20 is part 2 of my interview with Chief Warrant Officer 4 Brandon Stites. Brandon enlisted into the United States Army in December of 1991 as an electronics warfare Intercept Aviation Systems Repairer. After applying to Army flight school no less than 4 times, Brandon earned his wings at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and was selected to fly the CH-47D Chinook heavy-lift helicopter. Next, Brandon crossed over into the world of Army fixed-wing flying, where he flew the RC-12 N, P, and X Guardrail and the C-12U, J, and V Huron, flying in combat over Afghanistan and Iraq. During his career in the cockpit, Brandon served in a wide variety of jobs, including as a flight lead, operations officer, unit trainer, electronic warfare officer, training officer, senior instructor pilot, standardization instructor pilot, instrument flight examiner, maintenance test pilot, and maintenance officer. On the heels of a distinguished active-duty Army career spanning 20 years and 2 months, Brandon transitioned into the civilian aviation sector, where he flew as a helicopter EMS pilot, base manager, and regional aviation manager for the Medtrans Corporation. Brandon currently serves as chief pilot for Sherpa 6, a veteran-owned defense contractor specializing in ISR, logistics, and sustainment operations in support of the U.S. government. Thanks for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, Episode 20, Part 2, with Chief Warrant Officer 4, Brandon Stites. Enjoy.
So while I was up there, we got tasked to do a anti-drug. So the war started while I was up in Alaska. 9/11 happened. The morning that 9/11 happened, I was actually part of a 2-ship flight. We were down in Anchorage, which was unusual for 2 Chinooks to be south of the range. But Anchorage, so Elmendorf Air Force Base and Fort Richardson are right outside of Anchorage, or in Anchorage. And there's a lot of, we do a lot of paradrops down there, and we do a lot of infantry because the 506th, I want to say, Parachute Infantry Regiment is stationed down at Fort Richardson. So we support those guys a lot of gun raids, artillery 105 millimeter howitzer gun raids, where we fly in, we drop them, they shoot off however many rounds, we come in, pick them up, move them to another place. It's actually a pretty fun mission for Chinooks. Well, so we go down there the day before, we do our AMB, the Air Mission Brief, with our customers. Everything's good to go. All right. And somehow we finagled a way to stay on Elmendorf that night, which was kind of unusual because they usually tried to stick us in old dilapidated barracks at Fort Richardson. But, we're aviators, so we went over to Elmendorf. Well, so we're over there, and we spent the night, and then the very next morning, so that was on September 10th. The very next morning, and that night, we were supposed to do an NVG assault paradrop gun raid. So first thing that morning, and I guess it would have been around 6 o'clock local time up in Alaska. The guy I'm flying with, Kenny Loggins, not the danger zone one, but the other one. Not the danger zone, yeah. Yeah. He calls me, and I'm like, Kenny, what the hell, man? And he was one of the standardization instructor pilots for the unit. So he was a W3 at the time. And he's like, hey, Brandon. I'm like, Kenny, what are you doing, man? We got crew rest. We got to fly tonight. He goes, dude, turn your TV on. We're not flying that mission tonight. And of course, turn the TV on. And then I saw what was going on. It was like, holy cow. And then Elmendorf just erupted, right? There was F-15s taking off, it seemed like, every 5 minutes. It was pretty crazy. And then, so we kind of got together. We got mustered because as soon as the governor, the Air Force, and then the Army Guard found out that there was 2 Chinooks south of the range that they could put their hands on, we started getting tasking orders directly to us. They were calling Kenny Loggins, hey, you need to fight those 2 Chinooks. And there's a company called Alyeska, and they're responsible for security of the pipeline. So nobody knew what was going on. They're like, well, maybe they're going to hit the pipeline next. Well, we need to get infantry in these 2 Chinooks and run the line to make sure that, all these crazy things were happening. The Air Force wanted access to the Chinooks in case they needed to move security forces around. And the governor was like, hey, we might need, I was like, well, we're sorry, but we're not in the Alaska Air Guard or Alaska National Guard, you know. So after that started happening, you know, and Kenny was the highest ranking officer. So he goes, y'all, basically, stand by. So he called back to our command. It's like, somebody needs to talk to these folks. So the way the structure was back then, the command was USARAC, U.S. Army Alaska, and it was a 2-star general billet. And he was a really good guy. I think his name was General Brown. I can't remember. But he said, well, just stand fast where you're at right now. Well, part of the problem was we had brought down 30 MPs from Fairbanks to take part in this jump. I mean, these guys had to make their jumps too, because it was the 172nd Airborne Brigade up at Fairbanks. So it was almost all the MPs. Well, all the MPs were south. Guess who was guarding the gates at Fort Wainwright? The 9th U.S. Army Band. Because apparently, I didn't know this, but the band, one of their secondary MOSs is to support the military police, which makes complete sense. So a whole day goes by, and finally the very next day, the CG of USARAC was like, listen, you guys need to get those 2 Chinooks and those MPs back to Fairbanks. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, we had to file a flight plan with NORAD. Like, we had to fill out our 175, which is the military flight plan that's no longer being used.
Yeah, it's the 1801 now.
Yeah, 1801.
In the future.
Which thankfully, being in Europe, I'm still very familiar with that thing.
Oh yeah,
because it kind of caught me by surprise last year when I was flying in Texas. I'm like, no more 175. What the crap?
Yep,
so
it's not a thing.
Not a thing. But we filed it, and there was cloud cover through the pass. And to fly IFR between Elmendorf and Fairbanks, you had to go to 10,000 feet to get over the pass. Well, the clouds, icing, we couldn't do it. So we filed a flight plan to get gas in Talkeetna and then fly up the Denali Pass, basically VFR the whole way. And stupid Cheyenne Mountain, NORAD, denied our flight plan. No, you can't stop and get gas. You need to continue on. I don't know if they had a guy on staff that could fly Chinooks or what, but I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work. And Kenny's like, that's not going to work. And this is why. So there was a bunch of humming and hawing back and forth, and then finally we got it approved. So we go up to Talkeetna. And we're getting gas in Talkeetna, and the tourist trains heading north to head up to the pass, probably going all the way to Fairbanks. And, you know, it's full of mostly elderly people taking their tour of Alaska.
Retirees, yeah.
And the train slowed down, and everybody came out on the steps in between the cars and opened the windows, and everybody was clapping and screaming at us. You know, it was just one of those things that we were talking about earlier. You're like, holy crap, man. Like, these are just Americans that are seeing us and thinking that we're whatever. They don't know what we're doing. But it was very cool. Of course, that was like, all right, here we go. So we get up to Alaska, or up to Fairbanks, and let the MPs go do their job. And then, of course, now we're all glued to the television for the next however long. And our unit in Alaska, even though we were active duty, we were kind of the low man on the totem pole in terms of logistical support and modernization of our helicopters. Regular Army, and then like National Guard, unless it was depending on which state, because some states, I think like back then, I think Mississippi had like an augmented unit that supported the 160th. So they had some specialized helicopters. So they had a pretty good budget. But up in Alaska, for instance, we had some phases of these helicopters taking between 4 and 6 months. Which is completely, if a phase took more than a month at Fort Campbell, the NCOIC got fired. But there was 3 shifts and parts galore. We had access to everything. We were waiting for parts up in Alaska. And you know what happens? One helicopter gets in the hangar and you start doing controlled exchanges on this sucker. You have to really be careful because pretty soon you're going to have a couple of freaking stringers and maybe some cushions left, and that's it.
All the good parts get stolen to keep the other aircraft up.
To keep the other aircraft up. So I'm just trying to illustrate that we couldn't get stuff very timely up there. So we were the last to get all the modifications in terms of ASC for the helicopter, the aircraft survivability equipment, because they had upgraded the M130 flare/chaff buckets for protection of the helicopter. They added a bunch more. They added the new common missile. I don't
remember what the O stands for either. CMOS, right?
CMOS, yeah. Common missile something system, protection from surface launched missiles. And there was a new system they were coming out with, and I don't remember the name of that. IADS or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was pretty awesome. I never got a chance to see any of that because while we were last in line, I mean, there was guard units being updated before and also our engines. So we still had 712 engines on our helicopter, which were analog controlled, fuel control, and the 714s were coming to the fleet. Before I left to go to Alaska, in the 101st, we were starting to transition to the 714s, but I didn't get trained on it because they're like, you're going to Alaska. They're not going to get them for any time. Just, so in a mixed formation, and it kind of sucks. Like during air assault, before we take off, I'm out doing hit checks, health indicator type check to make sure the engines are doing what they're supposed to do. Whereas the new 714, it's all FADEC. They're just like, all right, we're started, let's go. So they had to wait for me. So that's why I didn't get trained on the 714s because we didn't have them up in Alaska. So we were waiting for the engines and the ASE. So we were not on the roster to deploy. We were the only active duty Chinook unit in the Army that did not deploy until, of course, we were Sugar Bears up there. That's the unit up there is called the Sugar Bears. And so the Sugar Bears didn't deploy until, I want to say, the fall of 2004, spring or winter 2004, 2005, because they didn't have the aircraft.
By that point, there's two wars going on. So we're watching, like Anaconda go down in Afghanistan. We're watching that whole thing, the 101st. So the unit I had just left 9 months prior is the balloon's up and they're gone and they are flying the bejesus out of those helicopters. I mean, it was nonstop. And it was deployment after deployment after deployment for those guys in the 101st, 82nd. This might be a minor point. How did those aircraft get over to the theater from Fort Bragg or from Fort Campbell?
If they needed a boat,
really,
is the primary, they would probably go down to Savannah, load up, and then head over.
And just to be clear, not like a carrier or an LHA or LHD. They're going to take the rotor system off. Yeah, roll the fuselage onto a ship, and then that's how it gets over.
And the Army has like roll on, roll off, or something.
Ro-ro ships.
But they're probably Navy ships. Now, if they had like the 160th, or if there was a very specific thing, then they'll C5, C-17 do a takedown. But the Chinook is so freaking big, and it's really not designed like a 53 to fold up and all this stuff. I mean, you have to disassemble. You have to take the, of course, the rotor blades off. You have to take the whole aft pylon off, and which the aft shaft is inside of there, and the aft transmission, and you load all the stuff up in the back of the Chinook. A C5 can hold 3 Chinooks and not quite all the ground support stuff, or 2 Chinooks and all the ground support cradles and stuff that need to go with the helicopter. So 1 C5 is, you're only taking 2 Chinooks really. They go by ship.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Especially at that time, the Air Force ain't keeping up, right?
There's other strategic missions.
There's no way.
Lift. Yeah, they're going to prioritize differently.
As a matter of fact, we were trying to get signed up to go to Djibouti to help out with a ship-to-shore mission. And there were no C5s or C-17s available. We were trying to contract with the Antonov to get that, and that wasn't available, so we didn't go. But what did happen, somehow, our battalion commander went out shopping, I guess, and found us a mission to support down in California. It was a JTF 26, I think was the name of it. But it's an anti-drug, multi-agency mission. So we sent 2 Chinooks and I think 2 medevac helicopters and maybe 4 assault helicopters down to Fort Hunter Liggett, California.
And so you flew these aircraft from Alaska?
Nope. They found a C5 for us, believe it or not. So this was the summer of 2003. We did a C5 loadout.
Okay.
And we landed at Moffett Federal Field in Mountain View or San Jose, wherever you want to call it.
Beautiful area, yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. And we built it up in one of the original blimp hangars,
still there.
The redwood one, not the metal one.
Oh, no way.
The redwood one. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
That's incredible.
I mean, you could fly like a stack of, 10 Chinooks through the center of that thing.
Huge.
Unbelievable. So and it takes approximately 14 hours to put a Chinook together after you offload it, and that's working nonstop. So we put our 2 Chinooks in there, we put them together, and we're getting ready to fly down to Fort Rucker, and that's where we're going to be living for the next 6 weeks. And you'll love this aviation story. So I'm the operations officer, and I'm flying the lead Chinook with our IP for the deployment, and really good dude. And then our maintenance guy was in second helicopter with a couple guys, and we had, gosh, what we had? We had 2 helicopters. I think we had 8 pilots altogether. And so we go to file a flight plan at operations at Moffett Field. And it's civilians working there. You know, it's very, the only thing that was there was the NASA Ames research, and then there was the California, or I don't know if it's Air Guard, but there's a PJ unit there.
Yeah, it's Air Guard. I think they have 60s and C-130s.
So, yeah, so that was the only game in town on the whole big, huge Moffett Field, which blew my mind. So we go to file, and the guy's like, do you guys want to do the Golden Gate transition? Of course, Jeff, we look at each other. I'm like, what the hell is Golden Gate? Like, that is in no literature that we had our hands on. What's the Golden Gate transition? He's like, well, of course, explain it to us. We're like, well, we'll take the Golden Gate transition. So basically, you take off from Moffett, you jump on the 101, and you go up to the bay, you jump in the bay, you fly around San Francisco International, over the Bay Bridge, over the Rock, over the Golden Gate, come out the mouth of the bay, and then head south on the coast. We're like, that's exactly what we want to do. And of course, you know, we're up with Tower, International Tower, when we jump in the bay. And of course, the first thing he says, you guys are cleared down to, how did he word it? He goes, you're cleared low level. So we kind of look at each other. So I call back, I'm like, how low would you like us to go? You know, and he says something like, as low as you want to go, or something. Yeah, it wasn't that exact, but it was something like that. We're like, what the crap? So, I mean, there's airplanes flying all around us, right?
They want you low.
So we got low,
way,
man.
Yeah.
And so you got 2 Chinooks just, you know, shitting and getting around the bay, the San Francisco Bay. It was absolutely incredible. And I'm, you know, and I'm flying and I'm trying to like sightsee at the same time. But it was fantastic. So we get over top of the bridge, and we're hitting the mouth, and we start to turn south, and on the outside of the cliffs, and I look up, and there's freaking hang gliders right in front of us. And this dude is looking at me in a hang glider, and my first thought was, I am going to chop this dude up into a million little pieces. So luckily, we're in a pretty loose formation, you know, because we're out doing whatever. And so I came off high and right, and we went around. But I'll never forget to look on that guy's face. I mean, we looked in each other's eyes. It was scared the living crap out of me. So my heart went back in my chest, and you know, I'm looking at Jeff. He's looking at me. I'm like, Jesus, dude. You know, explain that one to the old man.
Yeah, you can't.
You can't.
Yeah.
But we took the Golden Gate transition.
Approved as requested.
Yeah, whatever. So
what was the mission set you guys were doing when you all got down there?
It was straight support of, I don't even know if it's so the primary agency is the Forest Service, believe it or not, that controls the whole thing. So a typical day we go to Fort Rucker. We're staying in open bay barracks, not a problem. The food was actually pretty good. We go to a small airfield like San Luis Obispo, and we'd land at that airfield, and then local law enforcement would show up, and maybe a CHP officer, maybe a DEA agent, maybe a ATF agent would show up, but we'd only have like a couple people show up, and then like, all right, and then the Forest Service guy would be there to make sure everything was okay. And it was pretty comical because here I have this Forest Service guy, so I'm in a empty CH-47D, and I'm giving my safety brief. So we do the safety brief, and the Forest Service guy goes up and he goes, Mr. Stites, I'd like to, what is your max available payload for today? And how much of a margin is that from your actual payload? And I'm like, and that particular day I had 2 dudes. So I'm like, my load of 2 personnel? He goes, yeah. I'm like, single engine, dual engine? He's like, well, dual engine. I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to get into the manual to get you exact numbers, but you know, off the top of my head, somewhere around because we're going to actually be a little bit high that day up in the canyons, and it was hot as shit. We're not used to that up in Alaska, right? I'm like, I don't know, somewhere around 18, 20-ish, something like that. He goes, 1,000? I'm like, yeah, 1,000. And I'm like, single engine, somewhere around 6 to 8, something like that. He's like, 1,000? I go, it's a Chinook, man. I got 2 people on there. That's my load. It's a Chinook. I just thought that was kind of comical. And I kind of felt sorry for the guy because he's like, you know, they've had some pretty high-profile accidents with helicopters out there in the hills. And mainly they were 58s, you know, Alpha Charlie model 58s or little Jet Rangers. And these guys get in these canyons. And it gets bad really quick, and you can't get out. So
you have the power to save you if you need it.
Right.
And then some. Right.
So we started just flying up and down these canyons. I'm in my OH-47D. Talk about a colossal, if anybody, you know, is probably listening to this thinking, what a waste of money. Yes, that is a unbelievable amount of money being wasted on a Chinook as an observation helicopter. But that's exactly what we were doing. And, of course, the whole posse comitatus thing, right? So active duty Army, we're not allowed to follow American citizens, okay?
And there are some exceptions to that, as I understand, but very limited and very specific.
And it has to be written down, right? When we just had the blanket, hey, we're active duty Army, this ain't happening. But we were wearing weapons loaded. This first time ever I wore my M9 with rounds. And I'm in California.
Was in CONUS, yeah.
I'm in California. I'm like, what is going on here? So it was actually a pretty fun mission. You know, I felt like we were actually kind of doing something, and we found so much marijuana. You know, the cartels were moving all of the plants into the Los Padres National Forest Reserve because, you know, the government can't repossess land it already has, right? So these guys were putting camps up, and they're, of course, just destroying whatever area they're in because it was disgusting. All the chemicals they're using to make the plants grow. Believe it or not, so the first week, these guys are calling out the plants that, you know, we'd be in our jump seat or they'd be in one of the side windows looking down, and they could call the stuff out. And I'm like, what? How are you identifying it? Don't worry, it'll come to you. It'll come to you. I'm like, well, and of course, when it did, I was like, oh my God, there it is. And part of it is they plant, you know, in rows. But then the biggest thing that became a big indicator was the PVC pipe.
The irrigation systems.
You know, because there's no right angles in nature, right?
Nope, not at all.
And you would see the PVC pipe coming off a creek, and they would pipe the water uphill, and they would try to spray paint it like black or brown or try to camouflage it. But you can see it. And that's how we found most of it. So we spent a lot of time in Los Padres on the West Coast, and then we went and we spent a week in Fresno, flying out of the AVCRAD there. And then we were on the east side of the valley. So like there's an airport called Porterville, which is really cool. I saw an airplane get ground looped there. Too bad it was like a Cessna 195. I mean, it was a beautiful airplane. I'm like, oh.
Hard to watch.
That's hard to watch, man. Everybody was okay, but the airplane was not okay. We spent a week there, and then we got back to Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo. And we finished up. We weren't flying. It was actually pretty cool. You know, that's wine country. So we'd go out and we'd peruse a little bit, do some wine tasting. The state fair was, I didn't realize there was 2 state fairs for California. Huge state, so it makes sense, I guess. So we got a little bit of downtime while we were there. And then when we flew home, we flew up the coast, flew over Pebble Beach. Oh, my Lord. So on the way back to Moffett, I decided to fly on the ramp. Second best seat in the house of a Chinook. And wow, I mean, having the whole state of California open to you. We're flying over whales around Pebble Beach and, you know, Monterey Bay, the whole thing. It was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, that was my first experience in California. And you hear stories about California. It is absolutely gorgeous country out there, and I understand why people go out there to live. I wish the political was a little bit better. The political situation was a little bit better. Maybe it's going to get better. I don't know. But it's a shame that maybe more people can't really appreciate what's out there. Northern California was really fantastic. So we flew back up to Moffett, and we did reverse on the way in. We did the Golden Gate transition coming back in, and it was great.
Any hang gliders this time?
No hang gliders. Didn't see any. And so we did a C5 loadout. and we went back up to Alaska. And it was kind of a bummer because I spent my last summer in Alaska in California instead of Alaska because, the summers are pretty short up in Alaska. So in the meantime, some buddies of mine had been selected for fixed wing out of Alaska. And they're like, dude, put it in your fixed wing packet. Because back then, as a warrant officer, every year there was one board to be selected to the fixed wing course. And you have to put a 4187, which is a form that makes the request, and you have to spell out exactly. It's basically you kind of put your mini resume on there. You can't have any accidents or incidences. You can't have any action against you, in good standing, basically. So I'm like, man, I don't know. And of course, the guys are like, hey, man, if you get selected, it's free ratings. Where else are you going to get to go fly a King Air? I'm like, okay, well, shoot, I'll never get selected because I was at that point, a senior W-2 that was not tracked, meaning the tracks for a warrant officer were instructor pilot, safety officer, maintenance officer, maintenance test pilot, or TAC ops officer, like tactical planning officer, that kind of thing. And I always wanted to be an instructor pilot. And I had a slot already to Fort Rucker. I was going to leave Alaska and go to Rucker and teach at Rucker. I didn't want to teach at Rucker. You know how it is, the schoolhouse. You know how it is, you're in the schoolhouse right now. But especially in the Army, as large as everything is, there's the schoolhouse, and then there's how shit gets done, right? We're still using the manual, but the schoolhouse is different. You get people that stay there for long periods of time, and it becomes like how they like it done, right? We know how this works.
Technique only.
Technique, right? But it's their technique, and that's how you're going to teach it if he's the commander of the school or the SP of the school, the standardization instructor pilot. So we're like, oh, man. I'm like, well, I got to do it because I got to suck the egg. Well, so I put in the 4187 for fixed wing, and the day the results came out, a good buddy of mine who wanted it really, really, really bad didn't get it. He called me and he cussed me out, in a friendly way, right? He's like, you son of a, you know what, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, if you're joking with me, I'm going to drive over to your house right now and kick your ass. And he's like, I'm not joking, bro. You got in, you made it. And I'm like, what? So the results came out, and I'm like, I'll be dipped. And of course, some of the older aviators warrants were ticked because these guys were IPs, had been IPs or been doing all this stuff. And it was me and another W-2. We were both untracked, and he was a year behind me actually in seniority. And we both got it. He was a Black Hawk guy. One of my best friends, still to this day, we joke that we're brothers from a different mother. But we got it. We're like, what the crap? So now I'm worried because now I'm going to go fixed wing. And I was in the zone for 3, so I'm going to get promoted to W3 because the war's on, and I was doing all the right things. So I had no worry about making W3, but now I'm going to be a W3 untracked for how much time? And that could be trouble, especially in fixed wing, because now the population's getting even smaller. But I was like, well, you know what? I'll go and get my ratings. And at that time, I had 12 years in the Army. And while I was in California, I may have told you this before, but the California High Patrol was hiring big time because when the war happened, all of the CHP pilots were guardsmen, and the California Guard deployed to the desert, and they had no support. So I landed a helicopter one day, and a cruiser pulled up next to me, a CHP cruiser. And I grew up on chips, I'm like, oh, geez. I'm like, I was pretty sure I wasn't that low. I was off the reservation and climbed. So the guy gets out. He goes, hey, I'm a retired W3. I was in the Guard out here flying Chinooks, and we need pilots. And I specifically want warrant Chinook pilots, He goes, how much time do you have in? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I'm at 12 years. And he goes, dude. So the pay is a lot better at CHP. The retirement benefits were a lot better. And I was actually considering it. But my platoon leader at the time had grown up in Sacramento, and he gave me a real estate guide. And I was like, what? So I talked to the recruiter, and he's like, well, you might have to get an RV first. And I'm like, man, my wife's going to leave me, and wouldn't blame her. So I went to Alaska. I went back home. I was still kind of thinking about it, only because I knew what my future held, right? And I was talking to my dad, who at the time was an E8. I left this part out, but I was able to go out and promote him to E8 when I was a W2 at Fort Campbell. So that was a pretty awesome moment. So he's now a master sergeant / first sergeant, And I told him what I was thinking about doing. And he's like, I will get in my truck, drive to Alaska, and beat your stupid ass if you think about resigning and getting out of the Army. I'm like, you're going to drive up here and beat my ass? He goes, you betcha. I'm like, okay. It's been a long time since I've had that threat, but I'm definitely going to take heed. And, of course, I got the fixed wing. So that was all for naught. And the next 8 years went by light speed fast. So it comes up time to PCS, and I get assigned back to 224 in my battalion, the unit I was in as a young buck sergeant when I got selected for flight school. I'm like, wow, this is pretty crazy. So security clearance, again, in typical military fashion, 8 months before I got selected, my clearance was coming up for expiration. And I went to the S2 officer, and I was like, hey, sir, we need to not let this expire. You just never know what's going to happen. I don't want to go through this again. It was painful the first time. I don't want to deal with it. It's a lot easier to re-up it than start fresh again. No, don't worry about Chief. You're not going to need that.
I see where this is going.
You see where this is going?
Gosh.
And sure as shit, man, I get fixed wing, I get the 224, and now I have to redo the whole complete process. And I'm like, I want to go in there and wring that dude's neck, but he was a young lieutenant. I had a commander tell me one time, he said, Brandon, you don't know what you don't know. And at the time, I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. But as I became a little bit more mature, I was like, there's something to be said for that. And he was right. So we get in truck, we go to put everybody in the truck, we drive down to Savannah. It took like 45 days. We drove some I don't know, like 10,000 miles. It was crazy.
From Alaska to Savannah,
We
Georgia.
drove from Fairbanks, Alaska to Savannah via the whole West Coast. I took the PCH from Seattle to LA. Then we went up to Vegas. Then we went to Moab. Well, before Moab what's that big Lake Havasu? Moab, Aspen, South Dakota, Rapid City, the Badlands, I told the girls I would take them to the Mall of the Americas in Minneapolis, so went there, and then went through Wisconsin to the UP in Michigan, so I have family up in the UP.
Yeah, absolutely, yep.
So I stopped, saw my aunt and uncle up there, went down and saw my folks in northern Michigan, or my grandparents, because my folks were still living in Kentucky. Went down to Kentucky, and then my wife, Kim, her family's all in Kentucky also. So we spent a lot of time there, and then on to Savannah. It was crazy.
What a drive.
It was unbelievable. It was our last. Well, I shouldn't say our last. We ended up having some more, but it was a great family vacation. Our daughter was 15 at the time, and she wasn't exactly happy with me that I was taking her away from her first boyfriend. But so this is 2004. So we all got new cell phones when we got to America in Seattle. So I got us all. That made her a little bit happier. The old flip phones. So that was kind of cool. So go to Savannah. Now I'm a brand new airplane pilot, and this kind of goes along with it. But I already told you about how I feel about staff work. I'm a warrant officer. My butt belongs in a cockpit. Period. Well, I'm inbound to freaking Savannah. I think I was home in Kentucky on leave, and I get a phone call from a guy, and his name's Mike Morris, and I flew Chinooks with him in Campbell. He was our operations officer, and so he remembered me, and he gave me a call. He is the current S1 or personnel officer for the 224 Mount Battalion as a captain, a fairly senior captain. And I'm like, hey, sir, holy crap, you're in the 224. That is awesome. I can't wait to get out here and fly with you. He goes, Brandon, I need a favor. I'm like, what you got, sir? Anything for you? He's like, I need you to help me out here in the S1 shop. I need an assistant S1. And I was like, no freaking way. I'm not doing that. I am not going to go work on staff. I said, this is all new to me, all new airplane crap. I need to focus on my craft. I'm not going to do it. And he's like, Brandon, I wouldn't ask you if I didn't need your help. And, and he freaking started tugging on the old heartstrings. And, of course, I'm like, well, of course, I'm going to do it. God dang, I can't, blah, 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 blah. So I was not happy. But I'm like, well, here we go. Here's another, chance to, you hear it all the time, but, when do you grow? When you're outside of your comfort zone, right? But I was not excited about that in the least bit. So here I am now. Oh, and by the way, I made W3 en route. The list came out, so I was a W2P headed to Savannah. I'm pretty excited about that. I'm like, wow, I'm going to be a freaking CW3. I can't believe that crap, because not that long ago, I thought these guys rolled as crap.
Now you're one of them.
And I didn't think I was. So I show up to Savannah and immediately go to work in the S1 shop, and the airplanes were just coming back from an Afghanistan deployment, and they were all having to go through the reset because they were just used up. They were full of sand. No flying. There was no airplanes available, so I wasn't doing any flying. It sucked, man. And the flying that was getting done, so Mike, he was a pilot in command, damn good pilot. So when he got a chance to fly, he was flying. So I was stuck in the office, and I ended up doing that for like 9 months. And oh man, it was probably the worst 9 months of my career, to be honest with you. Dealing with all that, 2 soldiers. I was basically back to being an NCO. I was doing counseling again back in the FM. Back then it was FM 1-101 leadership manual. And I was like, crap, I gotta get back in this thing, because I wanted to make sure that I was doing right by them too, right? Because it's not fair they don't have an NCO. And then finally we got an E7 come in, and she was a breath of fresh air and shit. So that started getting help. So then there was 4 of us in the office. It's typical. We had a young kid, and he was a hard charger, and he was Filipino. And he had to go to ESL, English as a second language, and it wasn't that great. But he was like in charge of NCOERs and awards. So I was having to read. It was crazy. And then our soldier, she was doing the best she could do too. But it's 2 E4s, and there was a lot on their plate. So there was a lot of late nights doing that job. It was not fun. But here's the payoff. I finally got to start flying, and Mike Morse becomes the next commander of B Company, the flight company. And he's like, what job you want? I said, operations. He goes, it's yours. I was like, hell yeah. So I became technically the assistant operations officer, because the big operations officer at the time was a W4. But there was a cadre of young warrant officers, me, my buddy, Keith, another guy, Tim, another guy, Chris. We were kind of like the young guns, I guess you could say. So we kind of came in, and we were basically doing a lot of the work, which also paid off later on down the road. And then we got the word to, before we got the word to deploy to Iraq, I had to go through the Warrant Officer Advanced course at Fort Rucker. You had to do that to make W4. So I went to the course, and it kind of ticked me off because we had a mission request to go down to South America, and I missed it because I was going to that course. I tried to postpone it, but they wouldn't let me. So the guys went down south, and I didn't get a chance to fly in South America. I really wanted to go down there. They come back. I get back from the advanced course, and then we get the orders to deploy to Iraq, to Balad Air Base north of Baghdad. And it's going to be a 12-month deployment, which is cool. I was selected to self-deploy, which I was very happy, a little bit nervous about, but I was going to fly with Mike Morris.
Can you explain the term self-deploy?
We were going to fly the airplane from Savannah, Georgia to Balad, Iraq ourselves. And it was fantastic. So
not in one leg, just to be clear. There's a couple intermediate stops
definitely
across
not
the Atlantic.
in one leg. So all the aircraft had to, we can't do C5 loadouts with these airplanes. So
they have to self-deploy somehow.
The airplanes have to get over there. But they're King Airs. They're basically a super King Air. But we're non-RVSM, right? Which is was that reduced visual separation minimum. That's it, right? So anything above 29,000 feet. We couldn't fly that high. It would take us forever to get that high anyway. And we were flying with ferry tanks, which I felt like Charles Lindbergh, because these were 200-gallon metal tanks right behind our asses with tops. There was no gauges. There was like a hand pump that if the gravity Venturi type pump that we had didn't work, then we could hand pump it. And the only way to check the level was to pop the top and shine a light down in it. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And then you had to be careful on descent that you didn't go through, that the cabin didn't pressurize too fast or depressurize too fast, because the things would collapse, and you'd have, this happened, a couple inches of jet fuel on the floor of your airplane while you're still airborne trying to get to this airfield.
Yeah.
It happened to a crew.
Equalizing that pressure is incredibly important.
Not good. So, but I'm like, this is so antiquated. And, not just that, but these airplanes were, these highfalutin, very very good at what they did it was a communications and electronic intelligence platform, and they did this job like you cannot believe. But our avionics package on these airplanes was so flippin' old. It was EFIS, so that wasn't not exactly steam gauges, but our primary nav system was an old INS. And you pushed a button, 1001, 1002. Okay, it took. Push a button. I mean, it was insane. So the most advanced piece of navigation equipment we had on the airplane is our battalion commander bought each aircraft a Garmin 396 to put up on the brow, the glare shield.
Which is a great piece of kit, by the way.
It is awesome.
Even still now, I mean, it's not an iPad, it's not ForeFlight, but it really is an incredible, backup device, I guess.
It is. However, you can't put the whole world on it. You can only put half the world on it. So we couldn't start using it until we got to, I think it was Prestwick, Scotland, if I remember right, or maybe Keflavik. I think it was Scotland. So we take off from Savannah, Bangor, Maine, fuel, Goose Bay, Canada, Nova Scotia, RON, remain overnight. Get up the next day, fly to Keflavik, Iceland, which is in a very, not Keflavik, we flew to Narsarsuaq, Greenland, which is a very southern tip of Greenland. We could go there, or Sandostram, or I think the name of the town is Kangerlussuaq, up there. Not quite to Thule, south of Thule, but it's quite a way still up.
Still north, yeah.
It's still way up north. So we elected to go to Narsarsuaq, which, unbelievable. I'm so glad I was able to do that, but it's pretty scary. So it was like an NDB approach. I was like, what are we doing? And then from there to Keflavik, spend the night at the Naval Air Station, and they were just starting to shut it down at that point. So we were one of the last ones to stay there. And then the next day, get up and get into Prestwick, Scotland, fuel, and then into Wiesbaden, Germany. And then we got 2 days there for all the time zone changes. And then from Wiesbaden, we flew into Suda, Crete, spent the night, and then we got our modes and codes, flares, the shit we needed to go into country. Then we went in through Turkey. We stopped and got gas at a place called Esenboga. I think it was Esenboga. We didn't go to Incirlik for some reason. We went north to a commercial international airport, got gas, and it was kind of funny because the Turkish guys were looking over our airplanes, and we had the new CMOS and some other things on the airplane, and these guys started asking us a bunch of questions about what the airplane does because it's obviously not a normal looking airplane. Of course, we didn't tell them. So they started coming up with these ideas on themselves. And it's just, when you sit back and think about how other people look at our stuff, like American stuff, these guys are like, this is a laser. It's definitely a laser. You shoot missiles down with that laser? I'm like, that would be pretty cool. I don't remember what I said, but I remember him asking if it was a laser, and he goes, it's a laser. They got lasers on these things, and he was dead serious, and you're just like, wow. So we went in through the north of Iraq, and we went to Balad. We landed, and I'm like, holy crap, we're in Iraq. We did our tactical approaches. We tried to stay within the perimeter of the field from 5,000 feet, and kind of, I wouldn't say spiral down, but we're not getting too aggressive. These are airplanes that have a lot of weight on the wingtips of our ELINT pods. Electronic intelligence pods, a bunch of antennas in the ends, and they weigh about 600 pounds. So you have 600 pounds on the ends of your wings.
Far out on the moment arm.
Pretty out there. Yeah. And that thing already has, with those big powered engines, if you crapped your number one engine, which is your critical engine on these airplanes, you're fighting it. It does have rudder boost, thank God. But the airplane has power. We were doing V1 cuts on the runway. V1, brrr, rotate. I don't want to. But we did.
But you had that much power on the other side.
We could do it. Yeah,
wow.
We could fly it. And we trained in Fort Rucker, Arizona. That's where the SEMA course is, Special Electronic Mission Aircraft. So when I left Alaska, you go to the multi-engine qualification course in Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is actually in Dothan. And the Army, they do it differently now, but at that time, they throw us into a Cessna 182, and we do some landings and takeoffs. But it's that, in my personal experience, that was a bitch of an airplane to land, man. It just seemed like I dropped that sucker in every single time I landed. But it was instruments. It was mainly instrument flying, and then we did like 30. I think I did 31 hours in a 182. Then you go into the box. It's a King Air 200, full motion. And we spent, I don't know, another 30, 40 hours in that thing, do a check ride, and then you go out to the flight line and you fly the airplane. So the first multi-engine airplane I've ever flown in my life was a King Air 200. It was awesome. I think they were C and D model C-12s. Great fun. I mean, what a great airplane. You know, I will always have a special place in my heart for a King Air and Mr. Beechcraft. I think it's a fantastic piece of kit. It's an awesome airplane. But then once you graduate there, then you have to go to the SEMA course and learn how to fly the RC-12, which is a great big huge beast in comparison to a King Air 200. And you learn to fly the mission profile of the equipment on the airplane in conjunction, which, of course, here I am, Mr. Geek Boy, which I do have to add one thing as far as aviation humor goes. Like day one of the fixed wing course, an instructor got up, and the guy was actually a Navy veteran. We had a couple of Navy pilots that were instructors, and they were great. Mine was actually a Navy pilot. Well, we want to welcome you guys. Today's going to be the first day you guys get to enter Class A airspace, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I had to raise my hand. And, of course, I had my heart patch on. And he goes, well, except for you freaking Alaska Chinook guys, okay? All right, but whatever. So that was kind of fun, you know. Of course, it's not anywhere near...
Two different worlds.
Yeah,
you're
man.
crawling your way up there in a helicopter.
Like, look at this smart ass, you know? I'm like, yeah, okay. So the SEMA course was fun, Huachuca, great instructors down there. And then you graduate, went to Savannah, and then, you know, suffered in purgatory in the S1 shop. So we get to Iraq, and it was, as you can imagine, it was a completely crazy different world. We were mortared at least 3 times a day, rocketed every single day.
What year is this?
We got there in May of 06.
I'm trying to think just kind of where that puts it in.
It was right at the beginning of the surge.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, things were starting to heat up.
So Fallujah, Ramadi, hit. Anything west of Baghdad was getting insane. Baquba, which is northeast of Balad, was also pretty hot. The points south weren't as much. So we were flying up north. There's this huge body of water called Lake Tartar. So we spent a lot of time over that. When we first got there, we were flying north of Balad. I was flying off the Iranian border. And, you know, we would watch, there was an MSR coming out of Iran into Iraq. And you could see headlights as far as you could see at night. And we know that that's where the EFPs were coming from.
Oh, what's that? Sorry, again, breaking down acronyms. MSR?
Main supply route.
Okay.
And then there's the EFPs were explosively formed projectiles. It was
shape charges, basically.
Shape charges, killing our dudes.
Yeah.
It goes through Humvee armor like butter.
And that was something new that had not been seen in the battle space up until then, and it came very clearly from the neighbor to the east.
Yeah, it was bad. So when we first got there, we were kind of supporting mainly Army units, primarily the 101st, right? A little part in my heart for the 101st.
Of course, yeah.
But then the MEF, the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, was in the western side, Al-Anbar province. Is that right? Is that in Iraq? Am I getting Iraq and Afghanistan mixed up? Yeah, Al-Anbar. That was out west. I'm thinking that's Kandahar, south of Kandahar. Anyway, so we actually got pulled off the 101st, and the Marines were doing some serious work to the west side, and we started supporting those guys. And it was cool because the majority of our work was, you know, we called it like mapping the battlefield. So we could identify bad guys and what they were doing, and especially the ones laying IEDs. And our S2 officer, you know, could be back in Savannah, and, you know, it was cool because, like I said, the airplane was remote. So what we're doing is getting beamed via satellite back to Savannah, and then the guys write up a report and then send it to, let's just say, the intel officer for the Marine unit that was maybe going out the gate, and they'd get that information. It was near real time, and it was pretty awesome. And that's what Army ISR gives you over Air Force ISR, which, you know, the Air Force does a great job of collecting a lot of information, but usually don't get it for a little while. Ours was, you know, where I'm talking, there's hardly any delay from what we're gathering and what they're getting. So it was good stuff. It was I wouldn't say it was a fun year. I learned a lot. It was crazy. I made PIC while I was there. Took a PSC ride.
Really?
Yeah, that was different. Yeah, I ended up going down to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar because I was operations officer. I had to also go down there and do a stint at the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool because that you walk into the room and it's absolutely amazing. 2 huge wall displays showing the 2 different AORs, operations areas, and UAV feeds, and everybody's doing their jobs. So, when the air coordination order, air tasking order comes out, right, we helped put that out. And if we had changes, airplanes breaking, weather adjustments, time adjustments, then we would do that on the floor right there. And there was no 6 in charge. They kind of in the center of the room, they call it the crow's nest. So he's the overall guy. So we'd take a request up there. Hey, we'd like to change our flight levels from this to that, or from, these kill boxes to these kill boxes and these keypads. And he would deconflict. Our biggest deconfliction problem was with area refueling tracks, ROZs, restricted operating zones. And those frickin' F-16s, we were usually above them, and they would come off gas and go into a climb and point their freaking airplanes right at us, and we get a TCAS climb, a freaking resolution advisory, and it's always a climb. Let's say I'm at 29,000 feet and I'm getting a TCAS climb. I'm hanging on my props, I'm riding the blue line on this airplane.
You don't have the performance to climb any more than that.
Trying not to exceed 5 degrees pitch because we can't exceed 5 degrees pitch. I'm not climbing. It's not happening. And then, they'd go flying by. So we'd see him at the chow hall later. Hey, man, stop doing that shit. Stop doing what? You know what you're doing. But it was cool. These guys are doing these unrestricted climbs. They hit the end of the airfield doing 400 knots and just pulled the vertical. It was cool as crap. I was pretty impressed with Balad as a base. It's, we're in combat. We're logging combat time on our airplanes. Our biggest threat was small arms. So we would do a tactical climb and then a tactical arrival directly over the field. I felt a lot better at night, right? Like anybody would.
Are you doing this on goggles when you're flying that combat
No,
arrival?
we did not. No, okay. We did not have goggles on the airplanes. Balad's a very large air base, 2 massive runways. But at the same time, so I worked 6 days a week. Usually I worked every single day because if I wasn't flying, I was building missions because I was, like I said, ops. It was me and the TAC ops officer would build the missions every day. We had to do all the graphics. We had mission books that we put with the crews would come and do the mission brief. They'd take the books with them and fly on the airplane. We had to build the tracks, and we had to, based on where the support was requested, on where we put what we were doing. So it was pretty cool. There was always something to do, right? And our operations where I worked was cipher protected door. It was the old barbershop. So we were in what was called the Thunderdome at Balad, and that was like an Aleutian 76 hangar when it was Iraqi Air Force. So, and we had the offices that used to be the admin offices of that Iraqi Air Force base. I mean, it was one thing about Iraq is at least they had some infrastructure. Okay. There was roads, there was plumbing, there was electricity. It was, it was like being in Turkey, right? I don't equate Turkey with a full blown first world. I'm probably going to upset some people, but I'm sorry. It's not. The main cities like Ankara, right, is cool. Constantinople, I'm sorry. Istanbul is pretty cool. But as far as the country goes, Iraq felt like I was in Turkey. Okay. Well, on this base, they have a very large recreational area. They had an Olympic-sized pool and a gym. And as time went on, we started building mortar protection over all these buildings, like a second roof over the main roof that was very thick and built to absorb impact of mortar rounds and rocket rounds. So it's crazy when you're living in a world where, every so many yards there's a concrete shelter to dive into when the freaking It's not really a siren. The alarm goes off, and it's, man, when I hear that today, I'm like, oh my God, you know, just every once in a while I'll come across a video on social media, and it's like, one of the cool things was we had the freaking CWIS system protecting the base, and the first time that thing goes off and you're under it, that'll get your attention too. So that's that 20 millimeter Gatling gun that just blows shit out of the sky. It's absolutely amazing. So Sundays were usually my day off, and my buddy, civilian contractor that I knew when I was enlisted, he worked for Toby Hanna Army Depot, and he's one of the contractors that helped us with our systems, right? So all these big systems, we have a lot of civilian contractors helping out, and he was one of them. And he had a truck, full-size Chevy truck. So we would go for rides on Sundays around the perimeter of the base. But it would bring in, again, what you try to escape it a little bit, but then, you know, like you'd come across, so the burn pits, right? That's the only thing I'm really worried about in my future. Every place I ever went was this crazy big burn pit that was constantly burning something 24/7. And we're in the Army, so we're doing PT, right? Taking PT tests. I'm like, why? We're here for a year. How about we just do this, and then when we get back home, we'll... But no, you know, we're the Army. So you do the perimeter around the base, and you know, there was one huge part of the base that was full of all the tore up vehicles from IEDs, and you're just like, man. We were fortunate that every time I left, I was airborne, right? I wasn't in a wheeled vehicle going outside defense. But the Army took good care of us. We had food, and as the time went on, more and more stuff showed up. You know, you could get some pieces of home. The USO was fantastic. The shopettes were great. The call centers were pretty awesome. We all banded together and bought a satellite internet system in our little barracks. So I had 3 roommates. It was a big, long barracks with rooms down the side. And so our S6 officer, young captain, which is our commo, he ordered this thing. I think it was from Turkey, as a matter of fact. He set it all up, and we paid monthly, and we all split it, which every once in a while there's 1 or 2 guys that would be like, you know, downloading a bunch of crap while they're at work. And it's like, hey, man, like, you know, there's 20 dudes on this, right? So come on. But we had, I guess the point I'm trying to make is I had connectivity. You know, I could talk to Kim actually quite often. You know, I think back to the guys in Vietnam, you know, they would go a month or 2 without hearing, or they would do a tape recording, or even further back, World War II. You know, these guys went months and months or a year without hearing. That's just crazy. So the technology was pretty awesome. The year was up, and now I got to fly a plane back as a pilot in command, which was fantastic. So I brought 325 back, and that was a great trip because we got stuck in Keflavik for 3 days because of weather. And then we flew into Narsarsuaq again for fuel, and then Goose, and then came back into Savannah. And it was kind of cool because we checked in with New York Center, and they're like, our call sign was Sunny once we were stateside. It was different downrange, but once the 224 call sign is Sunny. That was Sunny 84. And, you know, it was like, Sunny 84, welcome home, boys. You know, and up till then, it hadn't hit you in the feels yet. And I was like, you know, I can't talk on the radio now, man. What are you trying to do to me? So we make it down there, and we do like a low pass. We came in around the hangar, and then we came and landed. And of course, everybody was waiting for us. It was great. And of course, I lost 30 pounds. I was probably in the best shape of my life. All of my deployments, I lost exactly 30 pounds. It's crazy. Apparently, that's how much beer I drink. 30 pounds of beer and steak and bread when I have access to it. And then when I don't, I drop it like in a month. Of course, we walked everywhere we went. My feet were hamburger. Try walking on loose gravel in new boots that you were just issued. It hurt. So I found out that I was getting assigned to Germany. I had wanted to go to Germany, so I got Germany, a VIP unit, and I also got the IP course, instructor pilot course, en route. So I was very excited. So when the time came later, so we got back in May of 2007. So actually, I guess it was April 6th to May of 7, and we got back. Did my PCS stuff and went to the IP course at Rucker, which was fun. And the guy who gave me my check ride out of the IP course was one of those young W1s at Fort Carson all those years back. You believe that?
Small world.
It is so crazy, small world. We're just up here looking at each other and giggling. We're like, can you believe? Because at the time, he was a W4, getting ready to make 5. I think he made 5. I don't know if he was a 5 then or not. And I was a mid-grade W3, and we're just giggling at each other. And can you believe, A, they let me in, B, I'm here with you right now. So the IP course was fun. I think every aviator should have to go through the IP course because I think it makes everybody a better guy. Just like I think everybody, when I was in Fort Campbell, not everybody got to go through the flight lead course. And I think that is something that every aviator should go through because you got a week of dedicated, just like the IP course, you get an aircraft assigned to you to do these things in this specific amount of time. And it's really hard to do when you don't have that resource to stick to it. So IP course was fun. I got really comfortable. Of course, by now I feel pretty comfortable in an airplane, and of course after flying that RC-12, getting back into a slick C-12 was different because it's clean. So man, it's slick. They call it slick for a reason. Those RCs, I got freaking antennas hanging off that sucker everywhere. So go to Europe, Stuttgart, and that was the best assignment of my aviation career. Spent 3 years. Started out as I was a COR, contract operation or contract officer representative for the Army. So I was the guy because in Army fixed wing, civilian maintainers maintain the airplane. There are no green suiters in fixed wing except for the Black Knights. They have a crew chief that flies with the airplane in case he's got to do something when they're on the road. And guess what? They pick a Chinook guy, which is awesome. At least they did. Hopefully they still do. So 3 years in Stuttgart, and then I got wrapped up for another 6-monther to Iraq. Because for the previous, so this was in 2009. So the previous 6 years, the Whitebirds, we called them. So at the Thunderdome that I told you about in Balad, on the other side of the hangar was the Whitebirds and the Sherpa, the C-23s, I think, the old shorts, 360s. Well, those had gone away. So it was just Whitebirds, King Air 200s, and one Citation jet, UC-35. Well, they had been run by the Guard and Reserve component, and they basically ran out of people. Couldn't get any more people to come do it, so like active duty's got to take over this mission. And for some reason, the Germany, my unit, the 214th Aviation, got assigned that. And I was in Easy Company, 52nd Aviation, down in Stuttgart, under the boys up in Wiesbaden. So we get to go. The good news is, though, they're flying Victor model C-12s, which is Proline 21. So I got to go to Wichita from Germany. Me and a guy went to Wichita, Kansas, and did the Proline 21 initial, which was fantastic. And then we went back to Germany, and we deployed to Iraq. So 6 months, it was great. I was still the COR at that point. I wasn't doing IP duties yet because those billets were already filled. So flew my ass off. It was great. Landed every airfield in Iraq because we were basically like a on-call airline, really.
Bookend it for me. Where was your favorite place to land? What was a place that was maybe challenging or you didn't enjoy landing at? If you went to every airfield in Iraq.
Okay, so Iraqi airfields?
Yeah, let's go. Let's talk about Iraq.
Probably the best place. Maybe the most fun. If I can even use that word. So Basra was very interesting because it was controlled by the British. And the guys running the DAG or the ramp were South African. Completely. If you've never spent a lot of time around South Africans, I recommend you do it because it's a hoot. Those guys are great. Baghdad was fun to get in and out of, I guess. And we landed on the west main, or not the main, but the west runway, because it was over by where the Air Force Base, the Iraqi Air Force Base, was on that side of the International. And there's a place called the Glass House, which was the protocol. So the protocol officer lived there, and that's where we would go get our customers and pick them up, drop them off. The worst... What was it? So Spiker, which was just north of us, was not that great of a place to land, especially at night. And it was always blowing dust. There was always low visibility.
Are you shooting instrument approaches to these places?
Yeah.
Are there GPS approaches set up? Okay.
Yep.
Is that pretty much just a GPS approach?
Well, and there was, of course, ILS at Balad, and there was an ILS at Baghdad. I think Ali had a ILS also, Ali base down south. There was a C-130 and EP-3 unit down there when I was there. Actually, the best place was probably Erbil, because northeastern Iraq was basically like untouched in terms of, we left our weapons in the airplane.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the Kurds. That's their
the Kurds,
that part of the
Kurdistan,
country.
Kurdish.
Yeah.
Yep. They took really good care of us. You know, we still rode around in up armored. We had Suburbans up there, believe it or not, that were armored. And they fed us very good. And Sulaymaniyah, I think, is another city right up against the mountains in the northeastern part of Iraq, close to Afghanistan. Absolutely gorgeous country up there. And those people were fantastic. So, man, the worst, man, geez, oh, Pete, Mosul sucked. Mosul was not the greatest because there was really only one way in and one way out. But this one day we had to go in there, and the winds were just too much. So it's a north-south runway, and you come up the river, and you basically you land to the north, turn around, and you take off to the south. Well, this one day, I'm in the left seat, and it was like 15 knot wind or something. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. I mean, it was a 9,000 foot runway. I'm not doing it. So I kept it super tight and super low. If somebody probably saw me flying a King Air like that in the States, I would definitely get reported and violated every which way you can do to somebody. But we came in and landed safely. I didn't do anything unsafe, but it's definitely out of the normal realms that you'd see an airplane flying like that. So Mosul was pretty crappy because they got mortared quite a bit too. Pot shots all the time.
And who is it you're flying when you're doing this mission set?
Mainly a lot of general officers, believe it or not. 06s and above, for sure. And then every once in a while, some couriers. But if we took a customer, say to Ali down south, and then we were going to deadhead back, or we picked up a lower ranking individual and we had room, we'd go into the PAX terminal and say, hey, I got room for 3. And then we'd pick them up and take them north.
The reason I'm asking is I'm guessing there's a bit of we talk about in the Navy a lot, perceived pressure. Is there a little bit of perceived pressure to get those folks where they need to go, even if the weather is challenging, even if, there's other stuff playing into that? There
kind of is, but at the same time, we're like, no.
Just can't be done. Yeah.
We're going to have to wait. You can delay. I'll give you an example of perceived pressure. This was actually not perceived. This was straight up pressure. Had a mission to pick up a 3-star general and his staff from Kuwait International and bring him into Baghdad. I think there was 5 of them. So we're like, all right, that's cool. We can do that. This is how much, they send us the manifest, how much weight, their body armor, their bags, the whole 9 yards. All right, this is how much gas we're going to put on the airplane, and we'll be able to get back without having to get gas anyplace else. It's close, but we can do it. All right. But we're taking off out of Kuwait pretty much at max. So go down there. And I'm the PIC this day as a W3. I'm flying with the lieutenant colonel, reservist. Good guy. He was an IP also, but and he was like kind of our operations officer of that unit. We were active duty supplementing a reserve command, so it was a reserve unit command. Our 06 was a great guy. I think he owned a construction business or something back in wherever, Nebraska or something. Good guy, really good guy. So we take off, we fly out on the international, and we go into the PAX terminal, go to the protocol officer, and we're like, okay, everything's still good to go. And he was like, yep, you're good to go, chief, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all right, cool. Where are my passengers? I need to find the aide or chief of staff. So I go in the room there, and it's a full-bird colonel as his chief of staff, short Italian ranger, built like a brick shit house. And so I give him a little safety brief, and we're getting ready out the airplane, and this 06 goes, oh, hey, chief, by the way, we're going to take this Navy commander with us. We got room. I'm like, I'm sorry, what was that, sir? He goes, this commander needs to go north with us, and we got room, so I told him he could come with us. And he turned around and walked away from me. And I'm like, here we freaking go, man. You know, I'm looking around. I'm looking for a quick drink of courage because I'm about to get my ass handed to me. I know this is going to happen. So he's walking away from me, and he gets out towards the tarmac before I catch up to him. I'm like, sir. I said, here's the deal. We have a manifest. He can't go. However, if you guys want to leave some bags behind or your armor or another person, then he can go. But if you want to take everything that you sent me to go, he's not going. He goes, no, it's okay, chief. We've done this stuff all the time. He can fit. It's fine. And he started to walk away from me again. I'm like, this is really happening, right? I'm like, I can't. And I'm like, my co-pilot, he's hauling ass, man. He's going to the airplane because
he does not want to be part of this conversation.
Well, he's actually in the left seat, so he gets to get in there and on my signal crank number 2 to get the AC going as soon as I can get these guys inside and shut the door. And I'm like, So I'm like, well, I'm the PIC, man. It's on me, right? So I go after him again. I stop. I'm like, sir, I need your attention. I don't think you understand what I'm telling you. And I explained it to him again. And he goes from civilized to uncivilized in 0.3 seconds. Calls me every name in the book. You effing aviation. It's always what you mofos can't do. Blah, blah, blah. Just dresses me up and down in front of God and everybody, to include the 3-star general, whom I'd flown in Europe a lot. And I'm just like, so I actually stood up, put my hands down. I wouldn't say I went to the full position of attention because I was pretty upset, but a loose position of attention maybe. So he's yelling at me, and when he's done, he turned around and walked away from me. I'm like, well, I guess that's settled. So I went up to the commander. I'm like, sir, I am so sorry. He goes, hey, chief, I can wait for the next freaking flight out of here. I'm like, well, I'm sorry that you had to witness that, and we just can't put you on and get out of here. He's like, I understand. I'm headed back to the PAX. I'm like, thank you so much. So these people, I go up there, they get in the airplane. Of course, the general's the last one in. He gets in. I'm sorry, he's the first one in, but he sits, back here. So I'm the last one in. I shut the door. I get my safety brief. I climb up. I sit in the right seat, and I'm looking at, and he's like this. So I don't say nothing because, it's a King Air. We get it cranked, and then we put our headsets on. And then I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? He goes, man, that was jacked up. I'm like, what? I'm incensed. I'm like, who does this guy think he is, man? Talking to people like that? And I'm like, I don't deserve that shit. So we get up there to Baghdad. And of course, I got to get out, drop the door, and I get to the bottom of the door, and I'm like this, waiting for the general to get off. He gets off. He stops. He comes to me. He puts his hand on his shoulder. He goes, thanks, Chief. I understand. I'm like, so he opened it. So I'm like, well, you know what, sir? It's all fun and games till I shit an engine on takeoff and we all burn and crash and burn and die. And he just patted me on the shoulder and walked away. And that was it. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me right now? Of course, everybody else got off and just walked off. And I'm looking at that freaking 06. And I'm like, Hope I never see you again. So I get back up to Balad and I go in to see the old man, the colonel. And he goes, I heard you had some excitement today, Mr. Stites. I said, sir. Of course, I tell him the story. He goes, do you want to lodge a complaint against this colonel? I'm like, no, but I don't. If I can, I would request not to be put on a flight request with that particular individual, if possible. He goes, we got it. So I never saw that guy again. Man, what a jerk off. But apparently, and I found out that the airplanes had been flying over Grost.
Oh, really? Okay. And you were probably one of the, I'm not going to say the first people to push back, but.
We did. So as soon as.
It's a safety of flight issue.
No, I heard. So when he told me that, I'm like, man, how many times has that happened where, yeah, we got a seat, throw them on. So we started kind of looking back at some manifests, and we're like, man, these airplanes have been overgrossed for years. So we did inspect. There's really not a whole lot you can do. It's basically you do like a turbulence penetration inspection. So we did some inspections with the airplanes.
You're going to pull some panels off. You're going to look at, wanderons and stringers.
Yeah, they were all good, and it was fine. But, it's like, yeah.
It's all fine until it's not.
Until it's not, right?
And so have no margin.
A lot of things change and I'm not trying to say that active duty is better than guard or reserves or whatever, but I will tell you that I think we're a little bit, for the most part, at least, we're a lot more rigid, I want to say, in certain aspects of what we're doing. So a lot of things changed when we came in. So that was the biggest thing with that.
And I'm guessing not all these flights were probably that story. There was probably, I'm hoping, a lot of good interactions. And
no, that was actually it.
That was it. Yeah.
The rest was awesome. We had a cool mission one night. We had to go to Al Assad at like 2:00 in the morning and pick up Undersecretary of Defense, the number 3 at the Defense Department, and her, I want to call them minions. Entourage. So they flew into Al Assad in a Gulfstream that didn't have ASE on it. That's why they went into Al Assad. And then we took them into Baghdad with the C-12s. And so we're waiting for her, and her first 2 little entourage dudes were in there. And it was very interesting to hear them talk about the French were trying to move in on us standing up the Iraqi Air Force. They were trying to, here, we'll give you, because the Iraqi Air Force at the time wanted F-16s like right now. Well, they hadn't had an Air Force in 10 years. So we're like, no. Well, the French are like, we'll give you whatever, fighter jets tomorrow. One of the coolest things I got to do was haul around an Air Force F-15 driver, 2-star general, that was tasked with standing up the Iraqi Air Force in the Iraqi Air Force Academy. So when they started this, they were up in Kirkuk, and then they moved it down to Tikrit Spiker, because that was the actual home of the Iraqi Air Force. And they were, at the same time, in parallel, they were standing up the Iraqi Army aviation with old 58s that we had and Hueys. And the Air Force was actually flying. I was there when they went kinetic for the first time. The Iraqi Air Force went kinetic with Cessna 208, a Caravan, a Hellfire. So they were, crawl, walk, run, right? And it was just neat. And I got to fly to those places, and then we spent a lot of time up north too. And one of the last flights I flew with that general, and I got his coin over there. He was a really cool cat. Like I said, he looked like a fighter pilot, freaking like 6'2", dark hair, in amazing shape. And we landed in Baghdad after like a 3-day trip with him. And I was with my buddy that finished number 1 in my class all those years back. Not only were we in Stuttgart together, we were in Iraq at the same time together. So we were flying together that day. Oh, and by the way, before I went to Iraq on that time, I had made W4, so I was promotable, and then I pinned while I was in Iraq. So here you got 2 and of course so did Matt, same year group. So we got 2 W4s up there. And, a little bit of gray hair. Senior officers like looking up front, seeing a little bit of gray hair in their pilots, especially warrant officers. And I was in the right seat that day. And we got to know this general pretty good. He was a cool, you get to know your customers. He was a cool one. So before we said goodbye to him, I got on the PA and I said something along the lines of, sir, on behalf of your Stuttgart, Germany-based flight crew, we'd like to welcome you back to Baghdad in the Glass House. We hope you enjoyed your support. And your flight today, over the last couple of days, it was our pleasure to take you where you need to go and to support your mission. And remember, fly Army. And I heard him, okay, God damn it, Chief, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, because there's nothing better that a bunch of Army dudes like doing than flying around Air Force brass. And the main reason is because Air Force had no tactical VIP support aircraft. None of their C-21s have ASE, just us and the Marine Corps. So the Marines had a UC-35 down at Ali Salim. I think it was Ali Salim that they were supporting in theater. They may have had it at Kuwait International.
They have that equipment on the aircraft that they can operate in those
right.
I gotta say contested environments, but there's a threat there. You're going to be able to respond to it with that equipment.
Yeah. So the Air Force fly their guys to Kuwait International, then we go down, pick them up, and bring them in the theater.
Yeah.
Unless they're coming in on a C-130 or C-17, that's the only way they're getting in. So we moved a lot of those guys, which was. Like I said, man, there's nothing better that Army guys like than to fly around Air Force brass. It was fantastic. Another aviation story I would tell you. So Army regulation 95.1, AR 95.1, does not limit an Army aviator from initiating approach with weather minimums below published minimums. We can initiate approach 00. Initiate an approach. We can't go below minimums, but we can initiate the approach. If you go down and you hit minimums and you don't see the landing environment in sight, you execute a missed approach and follow the missed approach instructions. Procedures, right? It's that simple.
That's very interesting because that's very different from the Navy philosophy. I can't do that.
And it's very different from the Air Force philosophy. So like I was telling you, there was a lot of nights with very low visibility going into Balad, and we'd had some weather come in and the ceilings were actually coming down too. And I shot actually quite a few ILSs to minimums going into Balad. Well, this one night, weather was going to shit, and we recovered all 3 of our airplanes. The Air Force sent their shit to Al-Assad or Baghdad. So the tower chief was an 05, comes down and starts ripping me a new ass. And I'm like, sir.
This being the Air Force tower
Air Force.
Chief. Okay.
I'm like, sir. I understand what you're saying. However, we can do that. No, you can't. You guys are a bunch of cowboys. I'm like, sir, nobody's going below minimums. They flew the approach. They broke out. They landed. Well, that's you. He just was not accepting that, and I'm like, well, sir, I think that this may be above our pay grade, and if you think the Air Force needs to stop us from doing that, then we need a letter from a GO saying we're not allowed to do that. You'll get your letter. Whatever. Yeah, we never did. I think he was pissed off because, and there was one other time. We were able to, in a C-12, shoot the approach into Kirkuk one day because we had the Proline 21 and these things, and we had updated GPS. What was it? The C-130 that the main entourage, because there was a big meeting, and we kind of took a smaller group of people in there, and everybody else was flying in the C-130, and the C-130 couldn't get as low as we could get. And I'm trying to think why. It had to do with, it was equipment, but I can't remember what it was. What we were able to break out and land, but the Air Force was up there, and they held for another 45 minutes waiting for the ceiling to lift before they could come in. I don't remember why it was. But that was another thing, too, that we relish in shit like that. We didn't break the rules. We just had better equipment, which is unheard of for the Army to have better equipment than the Air Force. That was very unusual. I'm sure it's never happened again. But it was cool living at Balad because it was, Air Force base primarily. H6 was up there. The hospital was right there. Anyway, the tour was up. My grandfather happened to pass away in Michigan 2 days before I was supposed to rotate back to Germany from Iraq. And the boss, the colonel, says, "What do you want to do, Brandon?" I'm like, because technically he was my grandfather, so the Army, I'm like, well, sucks to be you. I mean, we feel for you, but we're not. They only
recognize those very close family members or something like that.
Yeah. I said, he's the only grandfather I ever had. And he's like, okay. So the unit, I went and packed my shit. My shit was pretty much already packed. The rest of it I put in a box, and they mailed it to Germany for me. I grabbed a go bag. One of our airplanes took me down to Ali Salim, dropped me off. There was an E-7 there waiting for me, snatched me up, put me in a vehicle, went to the SATO office, got my ticket took me to international. I changed, went to international, Kuwait International, got on an airplane, flew to, I think it was Baltimore, from there to Detroit to Traverse City, Michigan. And my parents and my wife happened to be, so when I went there for 6 months, Kim went home to Kentucky. And when that all happened, my parents who were in Kentucky, they all traveled up to Michigan for the funeral. And I think it was like 34 hours from the time that I said I need to go home. I was home. It was absolutely unheard of, right?
That's incredible.
But then I turned around and saved the Army a shit ton of money because I decided to do a Space A from Charleston back to Germany. And to keep this thing aviation based, that was in the middle of that Iceland volcano explosion.
Really?
So we go down to Charleston and we sign up like, sorry, no flights today, volcanic ash. And I'm like, this is freaking awesome because that means that I got like a week of free leave out of that deal. So, and we hung out in Charleston. We jumped on a C-17 that was loaded with 308, 7.62. The whole C-17 was nothing but 7.62 ammo. So we flew into Ramstein, and then Kim was not happy with me because when we left Charleston, it was like 86 degrees. And when they opened the door at Ramstein, it was May. It was like 56 degrees, sideways rain. She looked at me and goes, this sucks. I'm like, yeah, sorry, baby. Welcome back to Germany. So we finished out our time there. And then I got offered a concurrent tour in Germany. They needed an IP in... so when I got back from Iraq back to Germany, I became the SP of the unit down in Germany, in Stuttgart. And then when I was getting close to PCS, and they're like, hey, we need a jet IP and UC-35. They were just running out of people to go back to Iraq. And I was like, so I mentioned it to Kim. She's like, do what you want. I'm going back to Savannah. I'm like, okay, well, that pretty much cinches that. So I called Branch. I'm like, I need to go back to Savannah. And he's like, well, what do you want? So I got the IE course en route, went to Savannah. Back to the home base, right? Back to the 224, and we were deploying this RC-12X for the first time. So myself and the S3 at the time, Major Martin Weaver, we flew that airplane all the way from Savannah, Georgia to Kandahar, Afghanistan. Once again, it took a week to get there, but you know that airplane has the universal avionics glass cockpit, so it was so much better than the first time I did that.
No Garmin 396 in that airplane.
No 396 in that airplane. I did forget to mention it in Germany. One of the best things about that unit was we had that C-12J, which was a 1900C, which was great for supporting Special Operations Command Europe or SOCEUR because they had a lot of gear. And normally, if we didn't have the J model, we'd have to send 2 aircraft to support them. And with the J, we could put everything in there. So it was awesome. And that was great to have that, get that type. And I got to spend 2 weeks in New York City at LaGuardia doing the 1900C initial through Flight Safety International. It was great. Me and a buddy who's now a pilot at American. The guy I was telling you about lives outside of Denton. So I do that 4-month Afghanistan tour, and that cinched it for me for my retirement because when you wake up every morning, your first thought is, man, I wish I was in Iraq. It's probably not good.
Tell me about Afghanistan.
It truly is a shithole. So I was in Kandahar, so down south. And I remember getting there, we were supposed to be downsizing, and I get there, and the construction that was going on was absolutely mind-boggling. The ramp expansion going on, the buildings being built. I'm like, what is going on? And we were getting rocketed pretty much every single day, and sadly, the Canadian compound was taking the brunt of it. We were flying a lot. The X model brought in a new capability. It was a completely different mission profile, so that was kind of fun and exciting.
Is there anything, without speaking into details, you can just kind of maybe compare and contrast the RC-12 that you started flying and then the RC-12X that you ended flying? Is there anything we can even talk about there or no?
Well, I'll just say that the first system was with like 2 other aircraft, and then the X was pretty much by yourself. Different levels of flight for the basic mission support, but that's pretty much it. It's a great platform, and we were doing some amazing things with it. Sometimes I wish, like I was kind of telling you earlier, I wish we could tell the bad guys exactly what this thing is capable of, because just don't do it, man. Stay home.
Yeah.
Don't go out. We're going to find you. So that was a good time. I did have 2 near mid-airs.
With what?
Freaking UAVs.
Really? Okay, so you're in the
Cyclops.
Stack. What is that?
That was their call sign.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So mainly Reapers. The second one was a Reaper. The first one actually was one of our own Hunter UAVs in Balad. Long story short, it was a hot, it's hot, right? So you got to taxi out and go because your temperatures are going to get up in your oil and you can't make it. So we're heading out and we were requesting immediate departure out of Balad. I'm in the left seat. And right before I made that call, a UAS was calling in saying he was getting ready to enter the pattern to come in to land. The tower told him to hold outside and gave me my takeoff clearance right then and there. I said, because then there was no response back from Yahoo. I'm like, man, I said, but we're getting hot. We got to go. So I put the coals to it. We depart at about 600 feet. I see this Hunter UAV, which is like a 700-pound aircraft, has a pusher-puller setup in my windscreen. And my first thought was I was going to drive my left pod right into it. So I'm on departure on a hot day. I'm heavy. I'm already in the climb. I wrap this thing up damn near 90 degrees to the right and ever so slightly give a little bit of aft pressure. Shit you should not be doing at that particular profile.
If you depart, then you're done. You're going to hit the ground.
It's over,
you
yeah.
can do anything.
But you know what? I've always flown with just a little extra, no matter what I'm doing, couple knots here, couple knots there. They say 5 more for mama.
A little bit.
So I had a little bit to give, right?
Yeah.
Thank God. And I let out an exhale while the guy in the right seat. One thing about Army aviation is the guy in the right seat, fixed wing, is running a checklist nonstop. He looks up in time because the tower starts screaming about traffic. And I wrap it up. He looks up because that's unusual. And he sees it go by. And he says something like, well, yeah, that was a little close. Thanks for the heads up, some shit like that. The bad part was, of course, I was pissed off. And then I found out why. It was in a civilian instructor pilot. It wasn't even one of our guys. So we were in B company, 224, and the UAS company was Alpha company. One of their kids was being trained by the civilian contractor, IP. Well, once he got cleared in, his ears were sweating, so he took his headset off. He was uncomfortable. He didn't get the hold clearance or amendment. So once it all came out, the shitty part about it is the Alpha Company commander immediately blamed myself and the guy I was flying with that we screwed up. I'm like, that's not what happened. So I called the tower and got the tapes, and we played the tapes in front of freaking everybody. And he didn't have the sack to stand up and say, my bad, my apologies. He got up and left the room. Yeah.
That's disappointing.
It is disappointing. He ended up making lieutenant colonel. Unbelievable. But
stuff will happen. What you do next is what defines what your reputation is going to be, right?
Well, and that set it. Yeah,
exactly.
That set it for him. So
good thing you didn't take your headset off.
No, and this same guy, I had to actually take the controls from him because we had fumes in the cockpit one day. We had to come right back in and land. He's in the left seat, and he was using up the runway. I'm like, sir, you got to take the power out. You got to take the power out. You got to take the power out. Finally, I had the flight controls, and I landed in the. Let's just say I got off at the end. I didn't blow any tires. I was unhappy to say the least. And this is a 14,000 freaking foot runway.
It's a heavy airplane too, so you have a lot of inertia to stop even once you're on deck.
I was not happy to say the least.
Yeah. That was near midair number one.
So that was near midair number one, and the second one was in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and apparently we were occupying the same kill box and keypads at the same altitude. Pitch black, nothing's on. Next thing you know, we got an RA climb. Right now, out of nowhere. Like this thing popped up out of nowhere. So I'm in the right seat actually, and the guy I'm flying with he pours the coals to it, starts to climb. I turn all the lights on because maybe these lights we'll see something. We never saw anything, and that's the scariest. When you any second now, I'm gonna hit something. I can't see it. And then the RA went away, and of course I'm on the radio, and the controller comes back. Well, they're not supposed to be there. They're supposed to be. I'm like, and I actually said, I'm like, tell it to my wife. Some jackwagon sitting in his freaking air-conditioned shelter in Las Vegas damn near ran me and my buddy over here in Afghanistan.
Good Lord.
So we got back and we found, we wrote up a little serious incident report bullshit. Probably nothing happened, but I'm like, oh man, I don't like UAS for obvious reasons. UAVs, it's different, man. When you got your ass strapped to the aircraft and you depend on it, it's a little bit different than sitting there drinking your freaking coffee.
It's a very different sense of mission ownership, and frankly, you can't have the same situational awareness when you're not. I mean, it's a soda straw in many cases. There's different sensors, like whatever, but you have different situational awareness.
No doubt. There's no doubt at all. But, it's, I don't know. If I was an Air Force dude and I got pulled out of my F-16 and got stuck in a freaking Reaper unit, right? I don't know. But, dude, we're over there. You got to pay attention. So those were a couple mid-airs that I...
Near mid-airs.
Near mid-airs. I was going to say mid-airs that I avoided.
Yeah.
And then, we got... The airfields came under attack all the time. So we'd come in, and then they'd shut down the freaking airfield. So we get stacked and racked out past the initial approach fix. And then we're all sequenced in based on fuel remaining. Another time when I gave it a little extra for mama, right? Which came into play one night. Then you come in, and then it's always shitty visibility. And one night we had to actually land on the emergency landing strip, which was a taxiway, because they would not let us land on the main runway because a rocket had impacted at some point somewhere. I'm like, at what point in the runway? We've got, 14,000 feet to shoot. There's a lot of runway out here, man. I'm a King Air.
Yeah.
I can land past it. I can, whatever. So I'm like, well, we basically, at that point, you're like, screw it. I declared. And then we're coming in to land. I can't go nowhere. You can't go any place else.
There's no other divert.
In Kandahar. Bastion was a little bit down the ways, and that would be a divert, but at that point, we didn't have the gas. So, and the problem with the emergency landing strip or the taxiway is you can't see it with low visibility. We pointed towards the big black hole in the middle of the field or off to the side and start coming down. And maybe, at the last minute, we saw the taxiway with the little blue lights, and we stuck it down. And it was just, it's like, good Lord, man. I mean, shit like that. It's just...
Makes you kind of wonder how we don't have more issues and more things happen when that...
It does make you wonder, because it's by the
is required.
Grace of God, like you're saving your ass to the point where how many other dudes are having to save their ass like this? Like you said, it must happen an awful lot. And of course, my freaking chew was 200 meters from the poo pond, so I'm sure there was definitely nights I woke up and I could visualize the poop particles enter my freaking nose and breathing them. I'm like, oh my God.
Burn pits over there as well.
And burn pits. Yeah, the place was disgusting. Afghanistan is just, everything was totally different. It's landlocked. So those damn Pakistanis would steal everything off the train, cars, en route. I mean, they would cut the seals, take the doors off the freaking hinges and steal shit. Yeah, I wouldn't classify them as allies in any stretch of the imagination. So the food in Afghanistan was absolutely terrible. I know I'm going to sound like I'm whining, but I'm comparing Afghanistan to Iraq, where we had full logistical control, support of everything we needed. But at the same time, I was like, there was the place called the Boardwalk in Kandahar, and there was a bunch of shops around it. And there was this one leather shop in the one corner. And when I got there, people were like, oh, hey, man, if you're ever down here and the owner of that shop is not there, stay close to shelter. I'm like, really? So it's a known fact? Yeah, it's known. The airfield was going to get attacked. And it did every single time. I'm like, why is he not
rolled up,
shackled up somewhere?
Yeah.
We had a cool mission one night. We were down over Spin Boldak, which is a little town southeast of Kandahar, right on the Paki border. And this little gentleman was making bombs down there, and he was running back and forth between Pakistan and Kandahar. And it was a family operation. stuff like that makes you feel good, man. When you're on these missions, you're looking for bad people.
I'm guessing you found them.
Yeah. I didn't. Some other dudes did, thank God. And we didn't find them on that particular day. But we got what we needed to eventually. So it was a different, Afghanistan was a different thing. It was Iraq felt like we were, I can't even describe exactly how I felt, how we were doing in Kandahar, because I'm like, what exactly is, we're supporting the guys, and it was mainly like anti-IED type stuff, or, trying to stop attacks before they started. But we weren't up north, we had a sister unit up in Bagram, and that's where a majority of at least for the Army. So the Marines were very engaged down south. As a matter of fact, when I was there, so I left there in September, October of 11. It was early 2012. We shared the same hangar with a Harrier unit, Marine Corps, and I think it was VMF 214 to be exact. Freaking Black Sheep. After I left, they had moved their operation down to Bastion or Leatherneck. If you were British, it was Bastion. If you were a Marine, it was Leatherneck. It was the same damn place. Well, that's when they had that big attack, and the squadron CO got killed.
Those folks, they got inside the wire and were destroying airplanes and killing people.
Yeah, and they were wearing our uniforms.
Yeah.
Freaking Afghanistan, man. This is Brandon speaking. When a goat is more important to you than your own daughter, we can't fix that. We can't adjust that. We can't improve on that. We can do nothing. The only thing we can hope to do is contain it some way, shape, or form, which now we can't do. It's absolutely infuriating what happened last year with our current administration. I can't even put it in words. We should have never given up completely there or Iraq. We need to have some place where we can protect it, but we can keep eyes on. We'll be back. It's going to happen.
I don't think anyone wants it to. I don't think that's at all what you're saying.
No, of course not.
Our adversaries kind of choose the time and place.
That's right.
Unless we choose the time and place.
Yep.
And so if we don't choose it, then yeah.
Nope.
Tossing the ball up.
Yep. It's just like when we first went into Iraq in 2003, and the Apache guys were, using airborne battle positions instead of strafing diving fire like they did in Vietnam. We had to redo it again. And they changed the ATMs to where you could exceed a 60-degree bank and a 30-degree pitch in an aircraft that's designed to exceed those limitations.
Literally to be aerobatic, just to be clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they started teaching it again after. But in the meantime, some dudes paid the price. It's unbelievable. But anyway, so we came home, and like I said, it cinched it for me, so I came back, dropped papers, and...
You proud of that last bit, though, in the 12X? Was it nice to see all those new capabilities, making it so much easier for the Army to do the mission?
Yeah, it's fantastic. They're still flying that airplane, and they're modifying it now because, as that the replacement, one of the replacements for that was the airplane that I was working on in El Paso last year, and that program was finally canceled. It should have been canceled years ago, but it was limped along. Awesome system, awesome package, unbelievable actually, but they put it in the wrong truck. They picked the wrong airframe, and they put too much shit on it in typical Army fashion. Hey, this works great. All right, well, we need to do that plus these 5 other things. Well, it's not going to work as well. Well, it just needs to work. Okay, well, it didn't work. So how much money did we waste?
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars gone.
And so as I understand it, there is a follow-on program to it, basically a different airplane, a different truck to get those sensors up.
Well, they're working on it. So the Army, it's touchy because, this all, especially when it comes to fixed-wing aviation, all goes back to the National Security Act of 1947 that created the United States Air Force.
And then specifically the Key West Agreement, as I understand it as well.
Exactly. So everybody divvied up responsibilities, right? And I don't think the Air Force back there knew what helicopters would turn into. Otherwise, they had taken that away from us also. But they didn't. And part of the problem is I had an Air Force lieutenant colonel ask me one time in Stuttgart, Germany, because I had just come back from that tour, and he asked me, hey, how are things going over there? And I was like, I'm sure you want me to answer that question, like, honestly? He's like, well, yeah, of course. And I'm like, well, I said, first, let me ask you a question. What's the number one mission priority / set for the United States Air Force? And it's always the same answer, air superiority. I'm like, okay. I would say it's something else besides air superiority. And he's like, space superiority? I'm like, well, no. I was like, I would say their number one mission is to support the United States Army. It's the number one mission of the United States Navy to support the United States Army, because nothing happens without a dude standing on a piece of dirt someplace with a flag in the ground, period. Now, the Air Force does a lot of projection, power, support, and it's unbelievable. The Navy, the same freaking thing. There's nothing that compares to the United States Navy. So we had a discussion. I was like, do you know how hard it is to get help from the Air Force? I mean, like I said, I'd be in Ali, and if I had 3 seats available in my airplane, I'd go in the PAX terminal, pick up 3 dudes, because, people aren't on vacation, right, in Iraq or Afghanistan. They're trying to get someplace. And if they're civilians, they must have a skill that is required at the place they're trying to get to. A C-130 rolls in, 5 airmen get off, go take a break, 5 airmen get back on the airplane, and it takes off. And I see that same airplane up at Balad or Baghdad. And I'm like, what the F, man? Well, we had, I'm like, whatever. It's excuses. Why did more stuff get moved by C-23s and CH-47s tactically to Iraq than by C-130? There's 2 C-130 squadrons down there. How does that happen? It shouldn't happen, right? It shouldn't happen. Anyway, that's my, it's frustrating. So to answer your question, the Army is trying to go jet for longer standoff, better survivability, better range, higher altitudes, because prop planes in a near-peer operation, in my personal view, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, you're talking 300 knots true. You're not running from anything or anybody. You're kind of out there. And depending if you got a active or passive system, you could be in big trouble. So there's 2 airframes out there right now. The system is called, altogether, it's Hades. And one is Artemis, and one is, oh man, I'm brain farting on the second one. One's the Artemis is a Challenger 650 based mid. Well, it's actually a pretty large cabin for the size of airplane. And then the other one is a Global 6500 based. That is, let's see, Artemis, Ares. The Global is the Ares. So those 2 combined create the Hades system, and it's supposed to kind of replace the RC-12 and give near real-time communications intelligence, electronic intelligence. I'm not so sure on the imagery intelligence. They'll probably leave that to UAS. They should leave that to UAS because that's in close.
But all told, I know you've kind of, like you alluded to, part of your old job, you've been exposed to a little bit of the sensors and some of the tech. Pretty good stuff. Oh,
it's insane. Yeah.
It's good. I hope it finds a ride. I hope the Army, finds a solution soon.
We're very close to Skynet becoming a reality, so you might want to be careful out there.
Yeah.
Find some hills in eastern Tennessee to hunker down in, because it's pretty scary. The AI is growing by
really
unbelievable leaps and bounds. Yeah. It's making our life easier, I guess you could say, but at the same time, it's kind of scary, in my personal opinion.
One thing that I don't think involved a lot of AI, you talked about after the Army, right? 20 years, 3 months, I think, ballpark?
Yep.
After that, one of the really cool things that you've spent some time doing is flying as a helicopter EMS pilot. Mm-hmm. So I think you stood up, and back me up if I'm wrong here, you stood up the base in Milton, Florida, at Peter Prince Airport, flying the 407. So just tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the first job was up the road in Augusta, Georgia from Savannah, and it was great. And I was actually hired as a dual guy to fly. They had a King Air and they had a Gusta 109. And I got signed off on the 109 first, which was a new world because now it's no longer Army Regulation 95.1. It's the FARs, the Federal Aviation Regulations. And I'm like, what does any of this mean? It makes no sense to me. So it was a vertical learning curve, I guess you could say. But flying EMS was it was a ton of fun. We're flying goggles, you're single pilot in a helicopter. And single pilot was something that I had never done before ever in my life. So here you are, a 5,000 hour aviator. And in my interview, the guy's like, well, how much single pilot time do you have? And I'm like, 0. He's like, 0? I'm like, the Army doesn't fly a single pilot anymore. I said, now, I would argue I was worse than single pilot on many occasions as a pilot in command and as an instructor pilot and as a maintenance test pilot. Had the shit scared out of me a couple times. I have a few more stories on that. Guys trying to kill me, but that's maybe for another time. So the day before my very first check ride that I was going to be given by the actual FAA inspector, our POI assigned to our certificate, who also was a retired CW4, something that may have worked in my favor. My director of operations goes, just take the helicopter and go put an hour on it by yourself. I'd feel better. That'd be your first time single pilot. I'm like, really? Okay, fine. So whatever. I went out and flew a helicopter by myself. I'm like, oh, I'm by myself in a helicopter. Okay. I went and took check ride. Everything went fine. And then I flew. And then we immediately got taken over by a company called MedTrans Corporation. It's a national corporation, EMS. Absolutely amazing company. I spent 9 years there. It was a lot of fun, great people. Our chief pilot was one of my main mentors of my life. His name is Don Savage. He's a legend. So yeah, we started, we brought in a 407. So the 109 went away, the King Air went away, just a 407. And of course my initial thought was, man, I'm regressing. I went from Chinooks, like what's going on here? I'm flying this little bitty helicopter. Well, guess what? The Bell 407 is not your daddy's Long Ranger 206. So awesome airframe, did a lot of cool missions, landing on the roads, on bridges, and people's backyards, front yards, golf courses, school. It just didn't matter. We landed it anywhere that there was room to put a 407. And you feel like you were doing something pretty cool, which we did. 90% of the time, everything we did had a positive outcome. We don't fly dead people. And the paramedics and the nurses in the back of the helicopters do things back there that's absolutely stunning and amazing, and it blows my mind every time I do it because they got about 9 minutes to do what they're doing before, typically, where we were flying in the southeast, you don't have these great legs like you do out west. So they do a lot of hard work real quick and fast and get these patients squared away so that when they get to the emergency room, they can be saved. Well, we were there for approximately 16 months, and due to things outside of our control, primarily political issues and community issues and hospital issues, at the end of the day, it's a business. And we were not being utilized up in Augusta. So MedTrans decided to close the base. Which they really don't do. They told us, I think we were maybe the second time that's ever happened at that point. So we got told we had a meeting one day. We came in and we flew the helicopter, kind of a neutral site, wasn't our actual base. And we were told that the base was being shut down effective immediately. So the paramedics and nurses were left in there. The mechanic was called into a different room. And then the 4 of us pilots were called into another room by our director of operations, and I was the base aviation manager. So I was like the lead pilot of the base. There's 4 pilots assigned to each one of these bases. So our DO says, "Hey, sorry guys, we didn't plan on doing this. We didn't want to do this, but here we are. The good news is you guys have jobs. The bad news is they're not in Augusta, Georgia." So I'm like, holy crap. And he's like, here is a list of jobs company-wide. Take your pick. Doesn't matter what airframe, which at that time, MedTrans was only flying 407s and then EC-135s. Fantastic. Eurocopter helicopter, but it's primarily German, which is awesome because the rotor turns the correct direction and it's German designed and it's fantastic. So, but the problem was all the jobs were like in Iowa, New Jersey, Kansas, Nebraska. I'm like, man, Kim's going to leave me. This is not going to work. So while we're looking at the list, he said, well, there's something that's not on the list. We're opening a new base in North Florida. We can't tell you where, but we are opening that. And all 4 of us on the spot said, we'll take that base. And of course the DO was, are you kidding me? All 4 of you? We're like, well, yeah. So now he's got a base in a box, basically. So he's like, it's yours. Had no idea where the hell it was going to be in Florida. Turned out it was Pensacola, Milton to be exact. Peter Prince Field, just outside of Whiting Naval Air Station. So when we found that out, I was like, oh man, this is actually pretty cool. This looks like this could be a blessing in disguise. And we found out that we were getting the company's very first GX-407, which is a G1000 avionics package. Fantastic helicopter, brand new. And we're going to get the first float-equipped helicopter in the mid-trans fleet because we were flying over a lot of open water. So we went down there, we stood up the base, and it was great. It was actually, the name of the base was Lifeguard. We were Lifeguard 1 in service with Lifeguard Ambulance Company, which was headquartered in Birmingham, but their main operating area was right there in Pensacola. So it was good, and it was good for about 3 years, and then quite honestly, I got tired. I'm a damn Yankee, right? I'm from northern Michigan. I couldn't take the heat anymore after 3 summers in Florida, the hurricanes. And Pensacola didn't get hit by a hurricane, but they went to both sides of us. And remember, we got the riffraff, right? So people started stealing crap, and traffic was terrible, and it was just awful. So I'm like, all right. And then our base was actually going away from the lifeguard ambulance, and we were being absorbed by the University of Florida Shands Care Aviation Program, which is a fantastic program. But there was a lot of extra stuff that went along with that. And I checked my email one day, and there was an opening in Tennessee. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Tennessee, that sounds wonderful. I always thought that Knoxville would be a cool town. So the old adage, be careful what you ask for. I did. I asked the question, and an hour and a half later, I had a class date for a new helicopter qualification course, and I was being assigned up here to Morristown, Tennessee to fly for University of Tennessee Lifestar #1, an EC-135 P2+. Great little helicopter. And then I had to go home and tell my wife that we were leaving Florida and going to Tennessee, and she wasn't exactly happy with me. So that happened, and I came up here, and for the first 2 months, I was actually commuting week on, week off between Pensacola and Morristown, Tennessee. The first couple times it was kind of neat, but then that shit got old pretty quick. So we got our house sold in Florida. We found a place up here in Tennessee, and we bought it, and we love it up here. So I was flying the EC-135. Everything was going great. And it was an IFR program, and the way Midtrans does it is your first 6 months in a new airplane, new helicopter, get to know the helicopter. One example is the wiper switch is right next to the go-around button on the collective of the EC-135. So you should probably, get a good feel of where stuff is. So I'm like, cool. So I'm flying VFR in a 135. My 6 months is almost up, and I got a class date to go do my IFR check, my 297 check ride. And Big Daddy Don Savage called me up, and a couple other of the regional managers that I had worked for, like, hey, you need to be the next regional manager for that area. I'm like, no. I kind of like being a pilot. Well, long story short, I ended up becoming the regional aviation manager of this area. So I could still fly, but my flying was drastically reduced. And then I had, to begin with, I had 10 bases, or I should say 9 bases. Sorry, I had 9 bases, and then it quickly grew to 10. And then when I left, I had 11 bases from Jenkins, Kentucky, all the way to Paris, Tennessee. Actually, from Marion, Virginia, all the way to Paris, Tennessee. So I was doing that for almost 3 years, and then I had a couple buddies flying that I flew airplanes with in the Army. And they were doing some contract stuff, and I'd always kept in touch with them, but at the time, they were still flying in Afghanistan. And I'm like, man, there's not enough money on this planet to get me back to Afghanistan. Well, that contract went away. We all know Trump came in. He goes, hey, we're not doing this. We're going to keep a very small footprint, but get these things out of here. So they left. No more Afghanistan. So I talked to my buddy, and he's like, hey, we're not doing Afghanistan, so I need IPs in Korea to fly RC-12s. And I'm like, let me talk to my wife. So I talked to her about it. She goes, yeah, she didn't like the job, the regional manager job. I mean, you're on the phone 24/7. I wasn't flying. I wasn't happy, so she's like, let's do it. I'm like, all right, cool. So it was going to be like 60 days on, 60 days off, really good pay. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. Well, from the time I agreed to do it and my clearance, because I had to go get a clearance again, and it was in the middle of COVID. So when the clearance came back, things had changed, and they had a -8. They needed IP down in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss. And I'm like, heck yeah, I'll do that instead. Type rating on a new airplane. A larger airplane, the biggest airplane I've ever flown, transport category. Those down there were -8 315s, heavily modified for military, for Army ISR. So I went down there and I did that for a year and realized that that program was not what it was supposed to be, and they weren't really going to be able to get it there. I got a feeling that they weren't listening to the right people. It always boils down to the doers, right? And the doers have to pay for the decisions that maybe people don't fully understand the decision they're making. And that's, in my personal opinion, I think that's what happened with that airplane. Well, they finally saw the light. It got canceled, which was like a blessing in disguise for me, because that was starting to get old, going down to, it was 60 on, 60 off, but it was really 70 plus on and 40 plus off, because ended up being the only guy down there. There were supposed to be two of us for 365 support. So I ended up pulling more time, which is not a problem. The guys down there, it was fun being back around Army, active Army. It had been almost a 10-year break. Of course, I also realized that there is a lot that has changed in the military. So I wasn't going back to El Paso. So the same dudes that got me into it were starting a new program with a different company. So I was able to weave back into that, flying the -8. This one is actually a -8 311, a former Piedmont Airlines commuter airplane. So it's not too bad. It's got dual EFIS, and we're putting in a second FMS and the mandatory ADSB and some other stuff on there. Hopefully we'll get that airplane here pretty soon, and we'll start doing some Part 135. We are a Part 135 operation, and I am the chief pilot. Looking forward to flying the crap out of that airplane with the other three pilots I've got seat time with in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's the first time I'm able to fly with everybody on the team right now, pilot-wise. We have explicit trust in each other, and that's, I don't even know how you quantify that. How do you put a value to that? I don't think you can. I think, it's like it makes me think of the TV show A-Team, where you've got a group of people that trust each other, and there's no separate silos. Everybody has the same silo. Everybody has the same goal. And we know how each other operate. We know what our left and right range limits are. It's just fantastic. So we hope to continue to support the Army and the military in a broader sense, because there's some good we can do out there, and at the same time maybe save the taxpayer a little bit of money. And currently there are not enough airplanes right now for what the demand is across every pretty much aspect of business aviation or military support. There's not enough. The Air Force keeps putting big airplanes in the boneyard. They're not making more big airplanes.
So what's the name of the company again?
It's the company is Sherpa 6.
Okay.
But Sherpa Air is going to be the aviation side of Sherpa 6. Sherpa 6 is a fantastic company. A lot of software engineers and hardware specialists that are helping make the soldier more efficient and I guess safer, to do his job, and free him up to be able to do his job at a higher capacity than he can do right now. So they're trying to make life a little bit easier for the warfighter. And on the aviation side, we're going to be hopefully amplifying that in support of the Army, and also, like I said, across the DoD, and we're doing more than just Army stuff. But it's a great company. The CEO was a Ranger, Army Ranger. So, and a lot of people that almost, I want to say we're probably 80% veterans in the company. So it's pretty good. And something that Sherpa Air can provide, maybe that not a lot of people can, in terms of, there's a small niche. So like the 4 of us that are starting this thing off with this airplane, we're all, 3 of us are senior warrant officer stands types, and the 4th one is a major. He's currently serving in the Army Reserves. But we flew together a lot. We all have TS, SCI clearances. We're all familiar with Army ISR and how to support that mission, even though we may not be doing ISR with this particular airplane, but there's a possibility for growth in the future. And the big thing is supporting these units as they make these missions happen. So the company's great. We have a great team, a lot of experience. I mean, even our dispatcher has an incredible amount of experience working with folks that have supported the government in the past. Our director of maintenance has the same experience background. We're currently looking for a director of operations, actually. So hopefully we'll hire one here pretty soon. There's a couple of excellent candidates out there that we're looking at. And one of them happens to be an old buddy of ours that we flew with. So who's been flying for Wheels Up for the last, 7-8 years. So the hard part about this is, in this business that I've learned right now, is the Part 119 qualification to hold the positions of chief pilot, director of operations, that kind of thing. It's a new world, man. You're not in Army regulations anymore. And now if we start doing some public use stuff, that's starts to get into a different kind of alternate realm. But we'll be maintaining our Part 135 because it's the best way to do it. Don't let yourself get in trouble. The biggest challenge that we had, I think, in Medtrans was like crew rest. You're on a 12-hour shift. You're allowed 14, but you take that last mission request at your 11th hour, and you're planning you can make it, and then something happens. Whether the patient needs a lot more care, you're delayed on the LZ, or you're delayed at the airport. Next thing you know, you're going to exceed 14 hours. And that starts the whole process, and to get the crew back home safe, what makes sense and legal. And that'll probably be close to maybe one of our biggest challenges too, because our op specs allows us to operate in North and South America. So we'll see how that goes. We're going to try and expand to Europe, maybe Asia. We'll need different equipment to get to Asia than the current airplane, but we'll see how it goes.
That's awesome. Sounds like a fun new challenge.
Yeah, man, I hope so. It has the bones to be absolutely amazing. So we just gotta get this airplane out of maintenance.
Yes.
And get flying it. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm going for my second 297 ride and haven't touched the airplane yet. So back to the simulator for a freaking check ride. Everybody loves check rides.
Yeah, for sure.
But it'll be a good one. So good people. You can't put a price tag on working with good people. You just can't.
Well, Brandon, wrapping this up, I always like to kind of end it the same way, and that's always giving you the last word. But looking back at your career, and it's not over yet, obviously.
Right.
Got a lot more fun flying and meaningful stuff in front of you. But from the 47 to the C-12 to the RC-12, that let's just talk maybe about that military career. Or actually, we can include Hilo EMS. But is there anything you'd do differently, or maybe anything from your experience, maybe advice you'd give to folks either entering the industry or maybe in the industry now, be it military aviators, civilian aviators? I'm trying to keep it broad, but last word is yours. I always want to let you guys have that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Man, I really don't know. So I've been very fortunate. But also, as I talked about, if you want something bad enough, you got to do what it takes to get there, right? And for the longest time, trying to get into flight school was a huge hurdle. But, you find a way, right? So I did. I would say maybe if I could go back and talk to my 12-year-old self knowing what I know now, of course, I mean, I feel very fortunate in the career I've had so far. I've been blessed. But having the benefit of hindsight, I would probably go back and say, hey, young man, prepare yourself for a military academy. Knowing, this kid right here, maybe specifically the Naval Academy, because I think, I've been able to, I didn't talk about it, but when I was in Alaska, we also qualified every year for deck landing qualifications. So I've landed on a few LPDs. The best one was the USS Dubuque. I don't even think that thing is afloat right now. It's probably in the scrap heap, or at least in the reserve fleet, because it was getting old. But I got some good experience with the Navy, and naval aviation is pretty awesome. And I wish I had a little bit of a broader view of things. I was pretty focused. It was a pretty narrow view when I was that young. And, like I said, you don't know what you don't know, right? Well, I didn't know what I didn't know. And maybe sometimes you think, well, maybe I wasn't smart enough to do that or something. When you're younger, a bunch of self-doubt. But it's like, no, man, it's there. You just got to go for it and grab it. And that's something I try to impart on some younger folks, to include, my daughter, and have a nephew. Anyway. That's probably it. Like I said, I've been very, very fortunate. But it's just proof that hard work pays off, right?
I think you're right. Best way to end it, just like that.